Okay, so we have 5 people there. I can let them in.
You can take down the slide, Kevin, and we can start. Thank you.
Hello and good afternoon. I am Nickie Aiken. I am the Cities of London and Westminster Member of Parliament. I was also the leader of Westminster City Council from 2017 to 2020 and was responsible before that for homelessness and rough sleeping policy from 2010. So I have a lot of experience in tackling the causes of rough sleeping and also helping people who find themselves on the street to turn their lives around. I'd like to thank the organisers today for inviting me to speak. And the theme of today's talk is on resilience. And I think the first thing I would say is that you do need a whole lot of resilience when you are working in the field of homelessness and rough sleeping. I think we have ongoing issues faced by rough sleepers, whether they come off the street and are willing to accept the amount of help that is on offer. But the people themselves need resilience, but those working with them are. And I think if we are going to tackle rough sleeping and continue to ensure that it is resilient, we've got to look at 3 areas. We've got to look at a resilient rough sleeping strategy for the whole of the UK. We need a resilient home building programme, and we need resilience in the rental market. And I'll go on to talk about that later. But first, I really want to talk about rough sleeping because it's a passion of mine, to be honest, having spent so much time trying to deal with it in Westminster. And Central London is home to, sadly, to the largest number of rough sleepers in the UK. Westminster attracts more rough sleepers than the next 3 boroughs put together. Many reasons for that. One of the main reasons when I speak to rough sleepers who have found themselves on the street is because they come to Central London because they think it's safe. The number of people around, it's very different at the moment because of COVID, but in pre-COVID times, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people around 24/7. So people feel safe on the street. They also know that those people can be very generous and give money and give food and drink to provide them with the resilience to stay on the street. And they also know that there are numbers of charities and organisations that provide hot meals on the streets of Westminster. Whether you agree with that as a strategy, whether it helps people, feeding them on the street is another matter. And there's a huge debate about that. But the biggest issue from a resilience point of view when it comes to tackling rough sleeping, in particular from the very first stages of homelessness, is the fact that many people who find themselves on the street are there for so many reasons. We are human beings, we all are individuals, and we'll find ourselves in situations for individual reasons. But for the most entrenched, it is down to mental health and addiction issues in the main. And we know this because from the Everyone In strategy that the government introduced last March, April, which was a brilliant partnership between national and local government, where hotels and hostels were turned into refuges for people on the street. No questions asked, just come in. And there were thousands of hotel rooms taken on board for this in Westminster and in the City of London, the other part of my constituency, as well as the whole of London and the whole of the United Kingdom, as we know. And 90% of people then on the street accepted the help. But for me, it was the 10% that were left on the street that refused all help that was my concern. And that is where we need to continue the resilience to not give up on those people, but to do all we can to persuade them and build up the trust. And you know, all the outreach workers I have met over the years, and I've met a lot of them, and they are brilliant people. They have a vocation, and they are probably amongst the most resilient people you will ever meet, because they will meet the same people time and again on the street who refuse all help. And it's down to these brilliant outreach workers' resilience that they are willing to carry on and go back day after day, night after night. One of the issues that we do have when it comes to rough sleeping is the legislation that is available to local authorities, to charities and the police. At the moment, we only have the Vagrancy Act, which was established in 1824. It was passed to respond to the soldiers returning from the I can never say this word, the war with Napoleon, and there were thousands of soldiers returning, and it is the legislation that remains today, and it criminalises rough sleepers. There's only one way that the act works, and that is by arresting them and sending them down the criminal justice system. We have more modern day legislation under the Police, Crime and Antisocial Behaviour Act 2015, but again, that takes a criminal aspect or an antisocial behaviour aspect. And the people that are constantly a concern for local authorities, the police, charities who are sleeping rough on the street, going down the criminal justice system is not an answer. It's not an answer for the individual, and I don't think it's an answer for society. What we need to do is stop the revolving door that we find. We take people off the street, whether it's through the criminal justice system, not as popular as it once was. The police don't like using it, and I'm grateful for that. But they'll only use it for the most persistent antisocial behaviour rough sleepers. What we do need is a complete overhaul. We need the Vagrancy Act repealed. Having spoken to ministers, I am very confident that that will happen. I think we've won that argument. We have been resilient ourselves, myself working with the likes of Crisis and St Mungo's and the Passage of Victoria and other organisations. So I think we have won that argument, but what does it be replaced with? That is the next piece of work that I am now starting with the organisations I've mentioned. I think we need to take an assertive outreach approach where we give outreach workers the powers to be able to really focus on those most entrenched, that 10%, as I mentioned before. But at the same time, we need the services that we've lost over the last 10 or 20 years, the mental health street services. We used to have in Westminster specialist mental health outreach workers who'd go out, but we've lost those. We need that back. We do need the services there. And we also need them to be able to then refer the people on the street that will then accept help, to a mental health bed or an addiction bed. We have over 400 beds available in Westminster every night of the year for rough sleepers, whether it's in a hostel, whether it's in a flat or whatever it's going to be. But the problem is leaving somebody in a hostel or leaving them in temporary accommodation does not address the reasons why they are on the street in the first place. And that's why, as part of the repeal and replacement of the Vagrancy Act, we do need these mental health and addiction services to be introduced, because otherwise it's just, as I said, it's a revolving door and there's no point doing it. I think from the resilience point of view, and I think it's a great word to use actually when you're talking about tackling homelessness. From a rough sleeping point of view, I think it's fairly clear that outreach workers and the charities and the local authorities with the largest number of our sleepers are constantly resilient, but they are doing it quite often with one arm tied behind their back because of legislation that is not fit for purpose in the 21st century and does not address the reasons why people are on the street now. They're not returning from war. They usually do have a lifelong addiction or a lifelong mental health issue. So I do think with if we could have more mental health services available for rough sleepers directly on the street, that would help. We also must look at the Mental Health Act and the ability for people to make assessments on the street. Is the threshold too high for those on the street? Because at the moment, the experience I know that many charities who work in the field have is that the threshold is too high. People are deemed to have the mental capacity to make the decision to remain on the street and not accept their help. And I have numerous examples of charities working with people on the street in Westminster who have refused help and are clearly very, very ill. And that will be, I can give you a clear example, and this is a true example that I've been told, of a woman living in the underpass at Charing Cross who had maggots growing out of her leg. But because of her mental capacity under the Act, she was deemed to be coherent enough to make the decision. I think she came in and out of mental capacity, and the times that she was assessed, she was deemed to be mentally able. To me, anybody who thinks staying on the street with maggots growing out their leg is, for me, physically very ill, but also mentally very ill. And we need the capacity to be able to make that decision for that person, that actually, to save your life, to improve your life chances, we do need to take you off the street, and we need to give you the help and advice you need. Obviously, we also need resilience in long-term funding. And again, I know this is an issue for local authorities up and down the country with the funding streams, and it's quite often on an annual basis. And what I'm lobbying government ministers, and I've spoken to Eddie Hughes directly about this, is about having longer term funding so that local authorities know what's coming, whether it's 3 years. I would preferably like to have a 5-year funding stream, but I know that's not going to happen. But at least 2 to 3 years has got to be an answer for local authorities then to plan and work with their charity partners to be able to provide the services that are required. Going back to when I said the three pillars of resilience within homelessness, which is rough sleeping, building more homes, and the renters reform bill, I think from a building new homes, the government has a very clear intention, which has already started, to build more homes. We are got a woeful amount of house building currently in this country, and it's been going on for 30 odd years, and it's been no matter what the makeup of the government administration, whether it's a Labour government, whether it's a coalition, or whether it's a Conservative, we still have not cracked it. But I do think that now that this has been made a priority personally by the Prime Minister himself, that we do need to resolve the housing market issue. I mean, you can see currently housing market inflation going through the roof, and first-time buyers are continue to have major issues. We've got to address that. It's got to be the right homes, targeted at the right people in the right places. It has to be a mixture of ownership, rental, and social housing. I'm very acutely aware in central London that, and I'm very passionate about mixed communities. We do not want to be an enclave for the uber rich and the uber poor. We need a mixture of tenures, whether it's for part ownership, full ownership, or market and social rent. So I do think, again, the government has accepted that and has begun a huge housing revolution. And I know that there's issues and concerns about planning reforms and housing algorithms, and I have shared those concerns too. But I do think within the white paper and within the government's proposals, we will be able to find a way forward. And then finally, let me just quickly, because I know we're running out of time, address the resilience within the rental market. I think COVID-19 has shone a very bright light on the real difficult housing situation that many people live in. And obviously, in places like central London and London as a whole, from where I represent, most people now have to rent, particularly professional young people or even families have got to rent. They can't afford to buy their own home. I couldn't afford to buy the house I live, the flat I live in now, and I've been in there now for 20 years. House inflation is ridiculous in London as it is around the rest of the country. But I think we obviously saw the eviction moratorium end last week, and there will be a lot of awfully worried tenants who have had that security extended over the last year in response to COVID. There will be some landlords I know, and I know from my own mailbag there have been a number of landlords very concerned that they haven't been able to evict problem tenants. I'm not sure that is necessarily the right thoughts, to be honest, because I know that that the government did allow evictions to continue for troublesome tenants, though I accept that the courts have been very slow on the uptake. But going back to security of tenure, I am a supporter of the overhaul of Section 21 notices. I think it is only fair that renters have more security of tenure, and I know this from my own personal family experiences. I've got close family who are tenants. You can never 100% relax, because you never know if the landlord is going to make a decision about your own fate, make the decision for you, and bring your tenancy to an end. And as the 6 months or the 12 months comes to fruition, I know that my own personal family do get nervous, and I can understand that. And I absolutely also understand that landlords need the security of knowing that they can change tenants if there's a problem with those tenants, but that doesn't stop now. So I do think that the way the legislation is currently written, it is skewed in favour of the landlords. And I'm not saying it should be a complete overhaul to the tenants, but I honestly think that I'm hoping that with the renters reform bill that the government is looking to bring, that there will be more of a balance for renters in today's market, because I think until we do build those new homes of all tenures, more and more people are going to continue to have to rely on the rental market space. So I think I will leave it there. I think I'm hoping that I've covered enough for you, that we have got to remain resilient, tackling rough sleeping and the causes of rough sleeping, continue to be resilient in the building of homes for all tenures and for all people across the United Kingdom, and then also being resilient in legislation that helps create a better balance between tenants and landlords. And I do think that we are very fortunate in this country that we do have amazing charities and organisations that fight every day for the homeless and for rough sleepers. And I pay tribute to those people. And I think continue to work together, we will crack this problem. The government has made it one of their top priorities to end rough sleeping by 2024. And I think we are in a good place to reach that amazing ambition. Thank you very much. Now, I think I'm going to take some questions. Virginia Murray says, how high a priority is ending homelessness within the government's levelling up agenda? What can people in the field do to make a priority as we build back better? Well, as I've just said, it's one of the main priorities that the Prime Minister himself has made it. The Prime Minister made his own personal priority, and Secretary of State Jenrick also is very, very passionate about this issue, and I've spoken to him about it numerous times. And so we have won the argument, those of us who've worked in this field for a long time, and it does fit in very well with the levelling up agenda, particularly the home building. And so I think, you know, it is a priority when it comes to Build Back Better, Virginia. I've got here from Jack Groom. Thanks for taking the time to do this talk. The Royal College of Psychiatrists have reported that addiction psychiatry could be wiped out, with some areas in the country left without a single trainee in the area. Funding for these services fell by 25%. How can we reconcile tackling rough sleeping with cutting these essential services? And that's the whole crux of my argument, Jack, is, you know, the government is very clear, and for the first time ever, a Secretary of State for the MHCLG stood at the dispatch box back at the end of February in response to a question of mine on the repeal and replacement of the Vagrancy Act, and agreed that the Vagrancy Act should be consigned to history. But what goes in its place? And my whole point is about services. We have got to have the services that address the real reasons why people tend to be on the street, the entrenched rough sleepers. You'll always get people, for whatever reason, who are coming onto the street every night, basically. But the services are there in Westminster. And I can only talk about Westminster. I can't talk about other local authorities outside my constituency. But I know from Westminster, which has got the largest number of rough sleepers of any other borough, has 7 nights a week, 365 days a year of outreach out on the street. And about 80% of those who outreach workers come across do not spend a second night out. However, there is the issue of that 10%-ish of entrenched rough sleepers who do need, as you say, need the psychiatric help, need the mental health whole issue, and the addiction help. So my campaign is with the government is about, yes, you can repeal the Vagrancy Act, and that's great, but what comes with it, and what we need are those services, and what we also need then is the funding that goes with those services. So, how much emphasis will government place on evidence around what works for tackling homelessness? What is the appetite in Westminster for this type of evidence? Well, from my conversations I've had with ministers, they are very data driven, and we know what works in central London because we've been doing it for a long time. We just need the legislation and the funding to turn it around. It is about mental health and addiction. We have so much evidence in Westminster. It's incredible. One of the things I did when I was at Westminster City Council was I was taken aback by how many people we were seeing on the street during the day begging. And they were obviously, the majority of them were addicts, whether it's drink, but mostly down to spice and crack and heroin. And I was getting the monthly rough sleeping figures, and I knew that the numbers were slightly coming down, but this wasn't really visible on the street in the day. And I knew my hunch was the majority of the people on the street in the day were begging. They weren't homeless. So I decided that we should do the first time ever, a daytime count. And from that, we discovered that there were more people on the street begging. They weren't Westminster residents in the main. They came in, they travelled in to raise the cash, and mostly to fund addiction issues. And so then we set up from the back of that data, that evidence, we then set up a street engagement unit, which brought in the charities, the police, the local authorities, the Westminster City Council's specialists, because again, I realised that we had amazing people on the street. We had excellent officers, we had excellent services, but they weren't always talking to each other. And so this engagement unit came together as a joint unit. And I based it a bit on the gangs unit that I set up in Westminster in about 2012 to respond to a very worrying growth in serious youth violence. And again, it's about joining together and pooling resources, pooling experience and knowledge. And from that, then we could target people who were not necessarily rough sleepers, but needed more help. And we did start to turn that around. But obviously, I don't know what the situation is now because I've left. I think I've got time for one more question. Let's put it up here. So, I've got one here. We know that the data that many people arriving on the streets have low support needs. What more can be done to stop the flow of new people onto the street? Well, we have been able to. We have seen a reduction in the number on the street. I think the last count we had was under 100. Before COVID, it was around about 300. So we have seen a dramatic drop. And what was interesting during the first lockdown in particular was that people who had been on the street for years, and some people have been on the street for a decade and refused all help, because the COVID pandemic had forced them personally off the street into accommodation because they were scared. There were services in these hotels provided by the local authority and charities to help start addressing those issues, drug and whatever it's going to be. And the vast majority of those people have not gone back onto the street. However, people's lives change all the time. People have mental breakdowns. People may have been on the street, may have been off the street for several years, but something triggers them back onto the street. And that's why we need that resilience of services on there to, once people do come back, that they can be very quickly scooped up. And when I say scooped up, I mean in a positive way, given the help and given the love and the support they need to return back to their homes. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen ongoing with the COVID pandemic. We haven't seen the massive job losses yet. And obviously we know from the hospitality and leisure industries that they are finding it difficult to find people to fill their job vacancies. So, there's some positive that we could perhaps not see huge increase in unemployment coming our way. So, but it's about having those services and the schemes like Second Night Out, which I think is a brilliant scheme, and it works extremely well. As I said, around about 80% of those that we come across do not spend a second night out on the street. Right, I'm going to leave it there because I've got to go now, but I hope that you found that an interesting talk, and it's been a pleasure being with you today, and I wish you all the very best for the rest of your day, and thank you for listening.